In other news, speaking at the Defend Our Democracy conference, the former Deputy Finance Minister Mcebisi Jonas has called for a national referendum on our electoral system. Jonas has said a referendum would define the way forward for our country. It could turn the political system around and liberate the country from the clutches of party barons. Well, Mcebisi Jonas, he's chair of MTN, but perhaps more famous, if you don't mind me saying so, sir, for your role as Deputy Finance Minister and for what happened during the state capture era. He joins us now. Mr. Jonas, thank you for coming in. I do appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Steve.
You suggested we need some form of electoral reform. What would you change?
Look, I think fundamentally we've got to contend with the reality that the political system itself needs to be turned on its head. And think about it. We cannot continue to depend on the outcomes of party conferences, suggestions about changing presidents, step aside rules of the ANC, etc. Those things have not delivered up to now. In fact, the credibility of the state has declined and continues to decline. The economic crisis continues, and the dysfunction in key institutions of the state continues, etc., etc. So I think fundamentally we've got to look at the system. Central to that, of course, is ensuring that we introduce a system that ensures greater accountability, public accountability of public servants, as it were. And for me, the electoral reform should be aimed at strengthening public hand in holding public representatives accountable and move away from a system where most elected representatives are accountable to their political parties and less so to the public.
You suggest we're backsliding you list four important ways. People are appealing to populism. People attack the Constitution. I don't know if you meant Zikalala, but maybe you did. People make it harder for journalists to do their job. I'm obviously going to support you when you say that. Would changing our system stop any of those areas of backsliding from happening? I'm not convinced they would.
No, it's a couple of things, though. Think about it. If you kind of follow Zondo's suggestion about directly electing a president, it changes the ball game. Because at the moment, let's face it, you have an executive president, essentially, and with direct powers. And I think if you turn this thing around, you have a directly elected president as opposed to an unelected president, and with, of course, the direct powers, and really deal with the powers in such a way that you start limiting some of those powers. It begins to introduce an element of public accountability that we have never seen up to now. But the second part, of course, is that if you get citizens more active through constituency system, and again, of course, you might have a hybrid, but still, if you actually increase the constituency component and therefore get citizenry more active and more organized in actually holding public representatives accountable, you're likely to have better results. That has its own risks. But I think we need to open up the political space. We still have a one-party dominant system, basically. And that's why part of the conversation should be educating the public about the importance of the electoral system, but also educating the public about the importance of political competition. And because wisdom is not sitting with one party. And at the moment, I think, I'm sure I pardon when the ANC thinks that their wisdom sits with it.
So I agree with your diagnosis, let me put it like that. I'm going to argue against you a little bit, perhaps.
For sure.
So one of the problems is, as you point out, is that we've had the dominance of the ANC. Niyazi Lesufi was sitting in just that chair the other day, last week, 2 weeks ago, and he said that, to fix Gauteng, you need to fix the ANC first. If the ANC works, Gauteng works. I thought that was quite an astonishing statement. At the moment, as you point out, if you want to control the country, you do it through the ANC. But isn't this changing? I don't think the ANC could afford to elect Jacob Zuma as leader now. Hold on. The point I'm trying to make is, isn't our system about to become more accountable than it's ever been before? And wouldn't this be the wrong moment to change it?
I think the timing is important, though. Think about it. If we continue in the direction in which we're continuing, there are two ways of the country changing, in my view. It's either you get a massive disruption, should I call it July uprising in steroids, or You do it through a more structured process of an electoral process where there is accountability, where there is a new vision being articulated and so on. So for me, it means two things. One is that get civil society and the population better organized. That's why I think the idea of a broad movement for democracy is important, whose aim is not about elections. His aim is about ensuring that we kind of introduce and hammer a new vision. People express themselves about what kind of public representatives we want, what kind of society are we looking for, what kind of economic changes and structural changes in the economy we want. It also talks about how do we turn around things like ESCOM. In ways that, in the electricity sector, in ways that ensure that there is consistency of supply and electricity is affordable. So I don't think that will come from political parties, quite frankly. And that's why I think the idea of a broad movement is important. But what it does, it actually creates a different momentum where you mobilize, educate, and ensure citizenry are activated enough to challenge the powers that be. On the other hand, I'm saying, as part of that process, temper with the power of political parties in ways that we have not done before. Of course, there are improvements. You're right. I mean, you're right. I don't think if the ANC was left on its own, Zuma would still be in power, I can tell you now. But because there was momentum, things changed. But you need to have structured engagement. That's why the idea of a big, mobilizing a big movement makes sense for me.
What's the difference between a movement and a political party?
Political party is, its end game is political power. A political movement, it isn't. It is creating a momentum. It's a particular intervention that's relevant at a particular point in time. And my view is that at this particular point in time, you do need it. You know? And how it morphs itself out as it go ahead, that's something else. But I think South Africans need to be mobilized. Public education needs to be enhanced about what people's rights are, but also a new vision for the country. Quite frankly, I shudder to think that at the moment there is no national vision, and I dare say no national agenda.
I would tend to agree with you. Would a historical parallel perhaps be that the United Democratic Front, the UDF in the 80s, was about resisting apartheid, but wasn't about political power? Perhaps you could argue the ANC was, maybe that's a bit controversial at the time, but that could be the difference between the two?
It could be, but I think you're not reenacting UDF.
No, sure.
You're actually setting up a movement that's based on actual existing conditions at this point in time. The mobilization that you want might not be the same as you did with UDF. Ideologically, it might be completely different. It might be based on a minimum program, and it might be based on constituencies that were not part of the UDF period. So I'm just saying that I think society and the kinds of alliances you want might not have historical precedence in the first instance. I mean, and secondly, the kinds of issues that you place in the table would be such that you place determinants of morality and ethical behavior, etc., back to society. And part of the problem with the ANC is that it is a liberation movement after all, so it defines what is morality. It defines what is ethical. At the moment, of course, you and me would agree that it is the most disqualified to do that at the moment, given the track record post-94.
It's an interesting point. You're suggesting that the ANC has been able to define morality in a way the Democratic Alliance and the EFF have never been able to. So I think that many people watching you, those who are not in the middle of stage 4 load shedding right now, would agree that we all need to do something. And that's the easy part.
Yeah, for sure.
The hard part is what? And if you start, I mean, if I were to immediately say, do we need electoral reform, everybody would say yes. If I were to put on Twitter, what would it be? Well, I'd get a different answer from everybody.
Look, the idea of again, that's why I said maybe we need a referendum. But what it does, though, is that you set in motion a process of public education, public mobilization, societal mobilization. And in that process, of course, you start defining what it will look like. But essentially, I think at the core of it is strengthening public accountability. That's the issue. And we might have instruments to do that. But think about it. At the end of the day, most of these instruments fall back to political parties to actually enforce. And that's why, I mean, many people will say you have the Zondo Commission's report. And what is in many people's minds is, will it ever be implemented? Some of the recommendations, will they ever be implemented? That's in people's mind. To make matters worse, the state has not even responded to the Zondo Commission. Government has not responded to the Zondo Commission. The ANC has responded. The Zondo Commission is it's not about the ANC. It's bigger. It's broader than the ANC. What the views of the ANC might be important, but they're not essential determinants of what might happen. Again, you come back to this separation that we have actually messed up. Increasingly, I think I always argue, when in good mood, when I say that many people would say that you gradually moving away from the idea of state minister, state president, to an idea that you have party operatives in State House and in government offices. That needs to change. You need to have all citizens having a stake in what happens in the country, etc. And part of the process of mobilization we need to do should be about that.
So all of that's true, but if you were to have a directly elected president, wouldn't the consequence be that you would end up with someone getting a mandate of maybe at most 35%? The only person I think might get more than that is Siya Kolisi. I can't think of anyone else.
Can I tell you something? Again, I'm saying political traditions are created over time.
Yeah.
But if you don't make the shift now, would never make the shift. This thing would ossify. It will ossify and become something like a democracy stillborn, basically. So I'm arguing that we are at a space in history where, as a country, we need to take the major political risk. And that risk is open up the political system, increase public accountability, almost to a point of risk. But what it does, it actually kind of begin to open us to new possibilities. And it changes, the kind of these things that I think have become embedded in our political system.
Mcebisi Jonas, thank you very much indeed for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Mcebisi Jonas, of course, is, as you know, a former Deputy Minister of Finance, currently Chair of MTN.